All right, so I just want to give my 2 cents here about the what's going on, what I think is going on with the Ukraine war. And, as a student of military history, I have to say it's interesting watching the political chess moves being made between, the Russians on the one side and the NATO bloc on the other side. It's interesting to me that Putin has been so cautious in making the war seem to the Russian people as legitimate as possible. He's going through kind of this whole rigmarole of, okay, we're going to try to make them surrender in the beginning by, moving towards Kyiv. And they did that. Didn't work. Boris Johnson scuttled the negotiations in Istanbul on behalf of the United States, right? So we know that. Then we start to see, okay, then I think my interpretation of the moves being made is, so Putin said, okay, they're not going to negotiate right away. Let's drag this war out a little bit. Let's see if they can handle the losses they're going to suffer. And they let the war drag out throughout the spring and the summer. And the Ukrainians took enormous losses. And they still refused to come to make overtures of any sort towards the Russians. And that has to do with the fact that the Ukrainian government is bought the fuck out. It's bought out. So as long as the money, which is going to run dry soon regardless, but as long as the money was coming in from the United States, from the West, and it was being disseminated amongst all of the corrupt public officials through all of these government cutouts and NGOs, as long as that was continuing to happen, the regime, the Zelensky regime, remained intact. And, what's also interesting is you see these little, these appeasement moves the Zelensky regime was making towards the, the right sector in Ukraine with the, with what happened in Mariupol, as far as the Zelensky regime seeming to take drastic measures trying to evacuate these people, and then doing the prisoner exchange. And I think on the one hand, Zelensky, maybe people within his regime, would rather be rid of the Nazi element over there in Ukraine. On the other hand, I think they understand that they need them and that, they're afraid of them. And all of this, coupled with the money coming in from the West, has created a situation where you have a country that is literally, well, some people would call it a country. I wouldn't call it a country. I don't think the idea of a Ukrainian nation ever really existed, except in the minds of people in D.C., whoever, Cato Institute people, I guess. I don't know, different think tanks. But that idea, and I guess in Nikolai Khrushchev's mind, the idea of a Ukrainian state actually existed. But to most people, I don't think anybody takes that idea seriously. A Ukrainian state cannot exist without Russia. It just can't. It wouldn't be Ukraine anymore without Russia. So now what's going on is, it seems like, this kind of dispels the idea that Russia is a dictatorship, because what you're seeing is a lot of pressure being put on the Kremlin and on Putin from elements of the Russian media, and, you see the bureaucracies doing their thing over there in Russia. I think Alexander Mercurius said that a lot of what has happened so far has to do with what he called bureaucratic inertia, and the fact that the bureaucracy of Russia resisted, an all-out war on Ukraine because they felt that the constitutional and the precedent hadn't been satisfied. The constitutional conditions and the precedential conditions hadn't been satisfied yet. So now we're at this point where there's been a partial mobilization. I hear so much from everybody. They must be really blaring this on the TVs that you have all these Russians leaving Russia, escaping the draft. I doubt it. I'm not there, but I doubt it. I mean, it's what I do not doubt at all is that Putin is incredibly popular. He has a popularity level in Russia that I think any president of the 20th century would envy. Maybe some have achieved 80% popularity, but it wasn't for long and it was rare. And, you know, considering that, yes, the Russian media, like the United States media, is to a large degree co-opted and it partners with the government. Okay, let's just say that those approval numbers are in the 60 percentile. Just to humor people, it's still incredibly popular. The war in Ukraine, by all accounts, as far as we can see, is incredibly popular. If someone could show me how these polls are manipulated, I'd be interested to see it. So far, I've seen nothing to that effect, so we have to assume that they are, to some degree, accurate. Otherwise, we would have seen enough media coverage here in the West to indicate otherwise. So we have to assume that Putin is incredibly popular, that the war in Ukraine is popular, it has broad support. And now we're seeing this, what Alexander Mercurius, one of my favorite analysts, he called a eerie silence. The Kremlin is extremely quiet as to what their plans are. You're hearing rumors of troop movements. My feeling, and then you have this air of confidence coming out of the Kremlin that is a stark confidence. It is conspicuous. And you see, I can feel a level of anxiety rising in the political bloc here in the West, especially in the United States, which is where I'm at. I can feel that they're a bit anxious about what's happening or what's going to happen. So I think that we're going to see something pretty, I don't know about spectacular, but pretty decisive. Knowing Putin, he's a very cautious leader, so I don't know if I would expect fireworks, but something rather decisive is going to happen. And I hear that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline can be easily repaired, or one of the pipelines, maybe Nord Stream 1. Supposedly the Russians have stated that they could repair this relatively quickly. And so the carrot is being placed back in front of the German nation's face. If Germany capitulates, that's the end. That's the end, because the economic war at that point, any prospect of it being successful is gone, which there is really no chance. But at that point, there's no prospect that the economic war can be achieved, can be successful. Not even in the most fantastic daydreams of, Lindsey Graham would the economic war actually succeed at that point. And I hear about, I hear scattered reports of tanks being carted in on trains to the front in northeastern, the northeastern border of Russia and Ukraine. I think that they could bring a lot more air power to bear than they have, and I think that alone would change the game considerably. I think their infantry may not prove all that more effective than the militia. We have to remember that the militia forces that have been fighting there for 8 years are very experienced. So And there's, I'm sure, conscripts among them, but the army as a whole, the militias as a whole over there have been fighting for 8 years. So we'll see how these green Russian units do. They certainly are going to have better equipment and more training, but there's nothing that could substitute for actual experience, right? So we'll see how that goes. There's going to be, if there is like a massive offensive of some sort, you're going to see logistical failures, and the Western media is going to hone in on that. But that happens in every war. That happened in Iraq, when we advanced in the beginning. Huge logistical failures. So this happens, but you'll hear about that. But maybe it will be some sort of, they appointed a general who was a combined arms expert, which leads me to believe this new general who's going to be the overall commander, he's very experienced in close air support type situations. He's also good at dealing with irregulars. That's what he did in Syria. So we'll see if maybe they continue to use irregulars to the extent that they have been. I'm sure the Chechens will be there, but I think the Donetsk and Luhansk people's militias are probably worn out at this point. But God bless them if they continue to have the will to fight. So we'll see some sort of advance maybe at some point. I think there's going to be something, I'm not going to say spectacular, because I know Putin, and I know that he's going to do something maybe that isn't going to be so exciting, but it's going to be very decisive. That's all I could say. So I think that's my assessment of it. As far as the stock markets, I think this is going to be a bad week. I mean, I know Peter Schiff has been calling for a Black Monday every single, podcast he's done. I don't know. I haven't listened to the entirety of his latest podcast, but if he's calling for a Black Monday this Monday, he might be right. I think that the bond market's going to fall apart, actually. If not this week, then certainly this quarter. All of these overvalued pandemic stocks are going to fall through the floor. A lot of them already have. But I don't know. I just think as far as the stock market goes, the bond market, we're going to see continued weakness in the euro, and maybe the British pound will start having problems again as we start to see political turmoil start to, get back into the headlines. In Britain, I think Germany has a good chance of making a deal with Russia soon, but we'll see how that goes, because I think these politicians in Germany are going to have to come to a decision soon whether they want to take the political ramifications of doing being the do-girls and boys of the United States. We'll see. But that's about it. So it'll be an interesting week, as most weeks this year have been. I think the stock market is in big trouble this week. I don't see any good indicators, and we're having CPI, and I think CPI will definitely be higher than expected. I'm just seeing that here on the streets. So that's my spiel for this Sunday, and I am going to bed.